Good to have you with us. Now, I understand, of course, you were listening to all of that going on. The fact that Donald Trump was prepared to come out and say, we are close to a deal, he may have actually said, and I don't want to misrepresent him, but he may have said, we have a deal on Gaza, and then rephrased it very slightly. As I said, on the day that Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about Israel's war on Gaza at the UN General Assembly and defending the actions that it's taken, what do you make of that juxtaposition?
I'm astonished. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has one virtue, only one in my view, and that is that he tells us exactly what he thinks, and he's always done so. And his speech, awful as it was, and condemning the people of Palestine to death in many cases, didn't give any hope, didn't give any indication of a deal. On the contrary, it laid out all the conditions for a continuing war. Now, either Mr. Trump wasn't listening to that speech, or he hadn't been informed in advance. But he seemed, as you said, Rob, he seemed to be picking up what Steve Witkoff said the other day about we are close to a deal, and we discussed this, and we weren't sure what that would mean. And we knew that the Arab states we'd just been meeting had a lot of red lines, and that's been made clear since. So I don't know what that means. Of course, I hope we'll find out on Monday when Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington. But for today, whether he says that or not in the White House, we have a classic example of Israeli intransigence. And it's an affront, that speech. It's an affront to the international conscience. It's an affront to the international community, which has been saying the opposite all week in New York, in those same halls. And of course, it's a death sentence for the people of Palestine. This isn't about peace. This is about belligerence. This is about unforgiveness. This is about a war which hasn't worked, that he wants to sustain and continue. That's not going to provide him any security, and it's certainly got a very bad future for the Palestinians. So the whole hopes of this week, and President Trump spoke to those hopes, didn't he, in these last few days? And in a way he did just now, go in a completely different direction. It's very hard these days to understand what's diplomacy and what's braggadocio and what is real. I'm hoping to God we will get some reality after the weekend.
You have obviously got a long experience of how the UN operates, not least, of course, the General Assembly. Now, in terms of the way that the public, including ourselves, perceive these meetings, are we right to look at them and expect significant strategies, significant proposals to be made? Or should we be seeing them as televised opportunities for grandstanding, for putting a message across on behalf of a country, and the actual negotiations are happening behind closed doors, that they're happening in other rooms elsewhere? So what we see on the stage at the General Assembly is not necessarily representative of what might be happening on the ground. Do you think that might play into what this disparity we're seeing?
I think so, and I think it's understandable that it's so. What we've seen in the Great Halls is public speeches, is that two-state solution session, it's affirmations of purpose and position and policy, most of which is very good, apart from just today. But it's about consensus of public and political opinion. It's not necessarily then about actions. We've tipped into the action segment with the Witkoff statement and President Trump's statement. President Macron has spoken about a plan that he put before and is being discussed behind closed doors. We don't really know, and we shouldn't really know, what's going on behind those closed doors. It is about difficult negotiations, and God knows Netanyahu has made clear how difficult it is. So we need to have a little bit of patience and tolerance to wait until, the high concept, high rhetoric, incredibly important positioning of key leaders, a huge change, by the way, from a few months ago on Gaza and Palestine, verges and tips into reality. We will have to keep monitoring it. We'll have to keep asking them. You said that. What are you going to do about it? But I think you're right. It's fair to say negotiations need to follow to give the details.
It's really good to get your analysis of this, and we appreciate it. Martin Griffiths, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Rob.
Okay, I want to bring in Hamda Sohout. She's live for us in Amman, and she's there because the Israeli government's banned Al Jazeera from reporting from Israel and the occupied West Bank. So, Hamda, you probably heard the speech that was being made by Benjamin Netanyahu. Will much of that come as a surprise to the people of Israel? How is that being reported in Israel?
Well, this speech is not being received well. It's not being received well by the Israeli press. It's not being received well by Israeli commentators, and certainly not being received well by the family members of Israeli hostages. The mother of one captive released quite a lengthy statement saying, quote, that Netanyahu's legacy will forever be abandoning his citizens so that he can have the throne. This is a popular opinion in Israel, that Netanyahu has prolonged the war for personal and political gain, saying that he has sacrificed the lives of those captives to keep the war going. But it just goes to show you that Netanyahu is still growing wildly unpopular among the Israeli public, but it's not just within Israel. Actually, family members of some of those captives held a protest in New York against Netanyahu, holding signs pleading with him for some sort of deal to bring about the release of their loved ones. But despite all of the efforts that are being made and have been made internationally by mediators, the Israelis have actually put up a lot of roadblocks in the past. There was a deal earlier in this summer that was on the table that Hamas had agreed to, but the Israelis had never given an official response back to that. And mediators said the ball was in Israel's court because the agreement had pretty much 90% of what Netanyahu and his government wanted, and the remaining 10% could be hashed out during the time of the pause. But the Israelis had never responded to that, and we can't forget that there was then an Israeli attack on the Qatari capital Doha, trying to assassinate the very negotiators that are sitting at the other end of the table. So because of that, these negotiations were largely stalled. But of course, the Americans are saying that there is progress here.
Hamda, thank you very much indeed. That's Hamda Sahoud bringing us up to date from Amman. I want to go back to Hani Mahmoud, who's live for us from Al Nusayrat in central Gaza. Hani, you were talking to us before. We had to cut away to go and speak, to go to that those words from U.S. President Donald Trump. You were telling us about how what the reaction was in Gaza to the loudspeakers that were apparently broadcasting a part of the speech of Benjamin Netanyahu from the United Nations General Assembly. Just tell us what's been happening with that.
Well, those loudspeakers were stationed at the eastern side of Gaza Strip near the border, so unlikely to be heard from this area where the vast majority of people have been pushed into displacement. But quarter way into the speech, people stopped listening because it was not a starter at all. Benjamin Netanyahu did not address the things that concern people here: the ongoing displacement, the enforced dehydration and starvation, the ongoing bombardment and destruction of entire whole city right now. Just throughout the speech, 4 of these explosions in the background, dark cloud of smoke rose in the skies, and the movement of the warplanes hovering at a dangerously low level from this area into Gaza City. And just in the past few minutes, more of these explosions happened. In fact, this speech was perceived largely either a justification for offering more legitimacy to the genocidal acts on the ground, or promoting for further genocidal acts that are expected to be taking place in the coming days as the Israeli military pushes deeper and encircling Gaza City right now around many of the critical remaining facilities, including the hospital, like a Shifa hospital or whatever remain of the buildings in the Tal el-Hawa area that's in the southern western part of the city, very close to the coastal road, the very lifeline for people. That's the only remaining lifeline for people to move it from central to Gaza City, as well as the northern central part of Gaza City. It did not bring anything new. People were hoping, but in fact, they expected nothing was going to change on the ground, because from day one from this genocide, it was very clear by the Israeli Prime Minister and everybody else in his government that they were going to go ahead to depopulate Gaza, and we're seeing this happening on the ground.
Hani Mahmoud from Al Nusayrat there. Hani, thank you very much indeed.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.